We're ready to start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pilar Segura. I run the Global MBA programs at the Fowler Career Center, as well as the Fowler Associates program. During the spring semester, our programming reaches all of the GWSB community, the master's degree students. And today, we're happy to welcome Mark Rhoads, immigration attorney and director of the immigration practice at McCandlish and Holton. Hi, Mark. And we have Meghna Mulani, who will be monitoring the chat room. We'll have Q&A at the end, and Meghna will be providing with your questions to Mark. Mark, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. So my name is Mark Rhoads, and I am an immigration attorney. What that means is that what I do for a living is that I work with companies all over the United States, and I help them process work visas and permanent resident green cards for international employees. My office is actually based in Richmond, Virginia, about 2 hours south of DC, depending on traffic. And although my office is based in Richmond, we have 10 immigration attorneys in my office, and we represent organizations coast to coast. We represent companies that have thousands of employees all the way down to startups that only have 1 or 2 employees. We process thousands of work visas and permanent resident green cards every single year. And I can tell you that in working with organizations, with companies all over the United States, most companies have absolutely no idea how the immigration process works. They don't understand how you move from being an F1 student to getting a work visa and staying in the United States after graduation. And because employers don't understand the process, it intimidates them and it makes them less likely to recruit international students. So I can tell you, I've been practicing immigration law for about 30 years. And in my experience, if you as an international student have a clear understanding about how you move from being an F1 student to working in the United States after graduation, and if you are able to explain that to an employer, you are going to be miles ahead in terms of getting employment in the United States after graduation. And I emphasize that today's session is for work visas after graduation. There are different ways that an F1 student can work in the United States during the degree program. You can use curricular practical training, optional practical training. The focus today is post-graduation work options. So for the next 40 minutes, what I'm going to try to do is give you the path that I see in my law practice that most international students follow to stay and work in the United States after graduation. And this path that I'm going to describe to you today, when I say most international students, I'm talking about 95% of every international student will follow the pathway that I'm going to explain in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to go through this in the course of the next maybe 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions. But inevitably, there are going to be people who don't get their question answered, or there's going to be some kind of technology glitch and everything is going to go haywire. So I think some of the most important information is up here on the screen right now, which is my contact information and the contact information for one of my law partners, Helen Conrad, who's also been practicing immigration law for over 30 years. And this information is useful because we will answer questions for free. So if you get out of this session today and you forget everything that you have learned, feel free to send me an email, give me a call, and I'm happy to answer your question. We're talking to an employer, and the employer has questions about how the immigration process works. Tell the employer to give me a call, send me an email. We answer hundreds of questions every year from international students and from employers who are recruiting international students, explaining the immigration process. So I encourage you to hang on to this information. It can be very valuable. So with that introduction, let me jump right away into the typical pathway that I see in my law practice that international students use to stay and work in the United States after graduation. And the pathway is like this. There are other options that may be available. I'm just saying that about 95% of every international student follows this pathway. It starts with F1 optional practical training, OPT. Every F1 student in the United States, when they graduate from a degree program, gets up to 12 months of what they call optional practical training, OPT. OPT allows you to work for any employer anywhere in the United States, doing any job, as long as that job is related to your degree program. The employer, the great thing about OPT, it's the single best way for you to get your foot in the door with an employer, because the employer doesn't have to do anything. The employer doesn't have to file paperwork with the government. The employer doesn't have to pay any fees. All the employer has to do is decide they want to hire you. You can go to work for that employer using optional practical training, as long as you have a little work card. It's a work card called an Employment Authorization Document, an EAD. It looks just like a driver's license. And I'm going to talk very quickly about how to get that EAD in a second. So step one to working in the United States after graduation is to get your optional practical training employment authorization document. It will allow you to work in the United States anywhere for any employer doing any job related to your degree program for up to 12 months. If you are in a STEM degree program, science, technology, engineering, or math, you'll get an additional 24 months of optional practical training for a total of 36 months, 3 years of work authorization in the United States if you graduate with a STEM degree. Whether you graduate with a STEM degree or you just have a basic degree from a U.S. university, you'll have either 12 months or 36 months of OPT. During that time frame, when you're working using your OPT, you're going to want to talk to the employer about sponsoring you for an H-1B. H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States, and it is the work visa that almost every international student is going to want to get during the course of the time that they're working using their optional practical training. So step one is to get OPT. Step two is to get the employer to sponsor you for an H-1B. H-1B will allow you to stay and work in the United States for up to 6 years. You can extend that beyond 6 years in certain circumstances once you've started the green card process. But for purposes of today, assume that you will have 6 years of work authorization using the H-1B. And it's typically while you're working using the H-1B that most international students will pursue a permanent resident green card if it is your desire to stay and live in the United States on a more permanent basis. So that's the typical pathway. You have F1 optional practical training, then you have the H-1B. While you're working using the H-1B, you'll want to pursue a permanent resident green card. And let me talk very quickly about green cards, because I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about green cards, but people always ask me, why can't I just get a green card? Well, first of all, what is a green card? A green card means that you can stay and live and work in the United States for the rest of your life. You don't ever have to worry about getting a visa ever again. Once you get a permanent resident green card, you can live in the United States. You can work in any job. It doesn't even have to be related to your degree program. Or you can be like a U.S. citizen. You can lay around on the beach all day and do nothing. So once you get your green card, it has great benefits in terms of work or not work in the United States. It also allows great flexibility in terms of travel. Once you get a green card, you can travel freely in and out of the U.S. using that green card and your passport. You never have to go back to an embassy to get a visa ever again. So in terms of work and travel, getting a permanent resident green card has great benefits. The problem with a green card is that it takes a long time to get a green card. In most circumstances, it will take far longer than you have in your degree program to get a green card. And there are only very few ways to get a green card. One way to get a green card is through certain family relationships. You have a family member in the United States, and the family member is either a U.S. citizen or is a U.S. permanent resident, has their own green card. That person may be able to sponsor you to get a permanent resident green card. Not all family members qualify. The only family members who can sponsor you for a green card are what they call immediate relatives. And that is parents, spouses, children, and in some cases, brothers and sisters. The waiting period for brothers and sisters right now is 15 years or longer, so that's not really a sensible option. But if you have a parent or a spouse or a child in the United States, and that parent, spouse, or child is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, that person may be able to sponsor you to get a green card. I don't want to waste time on family-based permanent residents. If you have questions, send me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to answer your questions. Other way to get a green card, if you don't have a family member, is through employment. If you have an employer who is willing to sponsor you to get a green card, that employer can pursue a process to get you permanent residence in the United States. Here's one of the issues with getting a green card based on employment, and that is you first have to have an employer. So when you're thinking about looking for a job in the United States, don't think about getting a green card. Think about getting an employer. Once you get an employer and the employer hires you using one of the temporary options that I just discussed, optional practical training or H-1B, then you can talk to the employer about pursuing the permanent resident green card. In most circumstances, no matter how you pursue a green card based on employment, there are many different ways. It's going to take multiple years, a minimum of 2 years. And in cases of citizens of China and India, it could be 5, 6, 7 years or longer to get a green card based on employment. And because of the length of time, again, don't focus on trying to get a green card when you're looking for work after graduation. Focus on the temporary visa options that will allow you to get your foot in the door with an employer. Then you can pursue permanent resident green card after that. So let's turn to the first step that I see that about 95% of every international student pursues. And that first step is optional practical training. And I know that GW puts on programs to explain and help you process your optional practical training employment authorization document. So let me just run through very quickly some of the issues that I see in my law practice that kind of crop up every single year. To take advantage of optional practical training, every F1 student gets 12 months of OPT. To take advantage of that OPT after graduation, you must get this little work card called your Employment Authorization Document, your EAD. You can apply for that EAD once you are within 90 days of completion of your program. And for most people, completion of program is graduation. So what I recommend is find your graduation date on a calendar and count back 90 days. That's the first day you can apply. You can apply for this EAD even if you don't have a job offer. You can apply for the EAD even if you haven't started looking for a job yet. Automatically eligible to apply for this work card as long as you are within 90 days of graduation. So you submit that application for the work card. Right now it's taking the government 90 to 120 days to process an EAD. You can ask for expedited processing. But in my view, there is no reason to delay applying for this work card. You want that work card to be in your hands by the time you graduate so that you can go to work after graduation for any employer doing any job. If it's taking the government right now 90 to 120 days to process, the earlier you apply, the more likely it is that you'll have that card in your hand by the time you graduate. So my recommendation to every international student, work with the International Student Office, get your EAD application submitted as soon as you possibly can, so that that card is in your hand and you are ready to go to work after graduation. Recognize one thing, once you get the card and the card is effective, it'll have a little effective date on it and it'll have an end date 12 months later. Once that card is effective, you only have 90 days of unemployment time. So remember, you didn't have to have a job when you applied for the card. The card comes in the mail, it has an effective date, let's say it's a month after you graduate. Once that card becomes effective, you have 90 days to find employment. So the faster you can find a job after you get that card, the better off you're going to be. If you are in a STEM degree program, science, technology, engineering, or math, you will get an additional 24 months of optional practical training. So once you are within 3 months of expiration of your initial OPT, you can apply to get an extension, that 24-month STEM extension of your optional practical training if you graduate with a STEM degree. But not every student with a STEM degree is going to qualify for that additional 24 months. To get the additional 24 months, you must be working for an employer enrolled in the government's E-Verify program. You see the third bullet point down. The employer must be enrolled in the E-Verify program if you're going to qualify for this additional 24-month STEM extension. E-Verify is a program that requires employers to electronically submit documentation to the government to prove that their workforce is legally authorized to work in the United States. Not every employer is enrolled in E-Verify. If you're working for an employer not enrolled in E-Verify, you will not qualify for the STEM extension. And I get students who ask me all the time, how do I know if the employer is enrolled in E-Verify? And the answer is, ask them. Every employer enrolled in E-Verify knows whether they're enrolled. If you're working for an employer who's not enrolled, they can enroll at any time. They do not have to be enrolled at the time you start your employment. They can apply, they can enroll in the E-Verify program at any point. If you are working for an employer that is not enrolled in E-Verify and they have questions about the process, tell them to give me an email or send me an email, give me a call, and I'm happy to answer their questions. So again, the first step in your journey to remain in the United States after graduation is optional practical training. Once you get your OPT and you start to work, you know that there is a clock ticking, and that clock is the end of your OPT, whether it's 12 months or 36 months if you have the STEM extension. But whether it's 12 months or 36 months, there is going to be an end date to that OPT. During the time you're working using your OPT, you will want to explore other longer-term visa options that may allow you to stay and work in the United States. You may be able to pursue a permanent resident green card during that time, but for most international students, the visa that you're going to want to pursue is called the H-1B. H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States. It is available to any student who has at least a bachelor's degree from a U.S. university or the foreign equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree. So let's talk a little bit about the H-1B so that you can see how you qualify, so that you can explain to the employer about this H-1B process. To get the H-1B while you're working using your OPT, there are 3 requirements. Requirement number 1, you have to have an employer to pursue an H-1B. When you file for your OPT work card, you didn't have to have an employer. You didn't have to have been looking for a job yet to get that optional practical training work card. H-1B is different. You cannot file for an H-1B on your own. You must have an employer who will sponsor you for H-1B. So step number 1 to getting an H-1B, you have to have an employer. Requirement number 2 is that you have to have a degree. You have to have at least a U.S. bachelor's degree or higher, or a foreign degree that is the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree or higher. So if you are currently in the United States in a bachelor's degree program, you don't yet qualify for H-1B because you don't yet have a degree. If you are here in the United States and in an advanced degree program, you will already meet this qualification because you'll already have your undergraduate degree. So requirement number 1, you have to have an employer. Requirement number 2, you have to have at least a U.S. bachelor's degree or the foreign equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree. Then you have requirement number 3. And requirement number 3 is the reason why most H-1Bs are denied. Requirement number 3 is that we have to show the government that the job that you are going to perform using the H-1B requires the type of degree that you have. In other words, the type of degree that you have has to be a minimum entry-level requirement into this particular occupation. The H-1B is known as a specialty occupation visa, meaning that it's only for occupations that require a specialized degree in order to do the job. The specialized degree, for example, an accountant has to have an accounting degree, or a civil engineer has to have a civil engineering degree, or a lawyer has to have a law degree. So you have to be working in a job that requires a specialty degree in order to perform the job. And what I typically will encourage employers to do, and when I do these kinds of sessions, I always get people saying, well, I have a degree in business administration and I want to go into be a hedge fund manager. Is that going to work? My answer is, I don't know. What I need to know in order to evaluate whether an H-1B is going to be a reasonable case I need to know a bullet point listing of the job duties that you are going to perform. And then I want you to get out your degree transcript, and I want you to tell me the coursework that you took in your degree program that trains you to do these job duties. And if you can make a strong correlation between your degree coursework and the duties of the position, you will have a strong H-1B. If you cannot make a strong correlation between your degree transcript and the duties of the position, then you might want to start looking for a different job that is more closely aligned to your degree program. So for example, let's say that you graduate with a degree in accounting, and on graduation day, you decide you don't like accounting, but you love art and you want to be a museum curator. Well, a museum curator probably requires a degree in order to do the job, but it doesn't require the type of degree you have. There's a disconnect between your degree coursework and the duties of the position of a museum curator. So you would not be able to make a strong correlation between the courses that you took and the duties of the position. So you might want to start looking for a different job rather than museum curator. So the point of that is go through that exercise. When we do H-1Bs, and we do thousands every year, I usually have employers and the employee go through that exercise of showing me how closely connected the degree coursework is to the duties of the position. And we have a very strong record of success with H-1B cases. So let's say that you've paid attention, you get your OPT, you go to work for an employer, you talk to the employer about filing an H-1B, and the employer files an H-1B petition with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Right now, it's taken the Immigration Service about 5 to 6 months to process an H-1B petition. While they're processing, they're going to evaluate whether your degree coursework relates to the duties of the job. If they believe that there is a strong correlation between your courses and the duties of the position, they will approve your H-1B. If they approve the H-1B, you will change your status right here in the United States. You don't have to leave to get a new visa unless you want to. You can actually change your status right here from F1 using OPT to H-1B without departing the United States. When that approval is issued, it will be issued for a 3-year period of time. During the time that you're working using that H-1B, you can only work for the employer who sponsors you. You can't work for anybody else. So you can't work for your H-1B sponsor during the week and then go sling lattes at Starbucks on weekends to make extra money. You can only work for the employer who sponsors you. You can work initially for a 3-year period. You can get a 3-year extension for a total of 6 years. Now, does that mean that you're stuck with that same employer for all 6 years? The answer is no. You can change and move to a new employer, but when you move to a new employer, the new employer will have to file a new H-1B petition for you. In other words, you can't rely on your previous H-1B. The new employer has to file a new H-1B petition. Well, why is that? Because it could be that the first job that you had required the type of degree that you have. There's a close connection between your degree and the duties of the position. But maybe the next job doesn't have that close correlation. Maybe the next job isn't related to your degree program. So every time you change jobs, the Immigration Service wants you to file a new H-1B petition to show that the duties of the new job require the type of degree that you have. So you're working using your H-1B. If you change jobs and go to a new employer, does that mean you get a new 6 years? No, you only get a total of 6 years, no matter how many employers you jump around to. So let's take an example. You graduate, you go to work for employer A. Employer A will get a 3-year H-1B approval. While you're working for employer A, let's say 1 year in, you decide you hate employer A, you want to move to employer B. Employer B will file a new H-1B petition for you. That employer will get a 3-year approval notice. So you've worked for employer A for 1 year, you work for employer B for 3 years. That's a total of 4 years. You'll only have 2 years of H-1B eligibility remaining. So it's 6 years of H-1B, no matter how many employers you jump around to. So when I do these kinds of talks to employers, and I do a lot of these presentations to employers, and I tell them, okay, so H-1B, most common work visa, have to show that the person has a degree and that the job requires the kind of degree that they have. And the first thing an employer will ask me is, they'll say, okay, well, that all sounds fine. What is this going to cost? How much does this H-1B cost? And who has to pay the fees and the costs of the H-1B process? Well, H-1B has essentially two categories of cost. First category of cost is an attorney fee, my fee, or fee paid to some other immigration attorney. Most companies do not have in-house expertise to process H-1B petitions, so they hire an outside attorney like me or some other immigration attorney. My fee in my office, we charge $3,100, $3,100 to process an H-1B. The second category of cost is the Immigration Service filing fee, the Citizenship and Immigration Services filing fee. And there are a number of different filing fees associated with the H-1B. I have listed them up here on the board. They vary depending on the size of the company. And you can see the various fees that are up here. But roughly, the filing fees are, for a company that has fewer than 25 employees, it's a little over $2,000 for the H-1B filing fee. If you work for a company that has more than 25 employees, the filing fee is a little bit more than $3,000. So you look at my fee, $3,100, and either $2,000, a little more than $2,000 if your employer has fewer than 25 employees, or a little more than $3,000 if they have more than 25 employees. So you're looking at between $5,000 and $6,000 for the H-1B process. Now, when I tell that to students, they typically go, no employer is going to hire me and spend that kind of money to process an H-1B. And let's be clear, those costs are employer expenses. They cannot be paid by the employee. They cannot be paid by the employer and then reimbursed by the employee. They are 100% employer expenses. And I can promise you that in my office over the years, we probably processed 50,000 or more H-1Bs. I can count on one hand the number of employers who decided not to go forward because of these fees and costs. These things are not intimidating to employers. Most employers view the H-1B costs as just a cost of recruiting. They spend money sending people to college campuses to recruit. They spend money on advertising for positions. It is just another recruiting expense in their view. So do not be intimidated by the fees and expenses of the H-1B process. But it is important to know what they are so that you can help employers understand what the costs are. Because I hear all kinds of nonsense from employers that they heard that it's $15,000 to process an H-1B. That's nonsense. It is not as expensive as many employers believe. So it's important for you to understand what those costs are. So if the cost of the process is not a problem for employers, what is the big problem? Well, the big problem is up here on the board right now, which is the H-1B quota. So the H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States, but there is a limited quota on the number of new H-1Bs that the government can issue every single year. And I emphasize new H-1Bs because once you get an H-1B for the first time, you never have to worry about the quota ever again. You only need to worry about the H-1B quota when you're getting your very first H-1B. After you get an H-1B, you can change employers. You don't have to worry about the quota. If you're at the end of your first 3 years of H-1B, you want to apply for an extension for the additional 3 years, you don't have to worry about the quota. You only have to worry about the quota the first time you get the H-1B. The quota is released every single year on October 1, and the quota year runs until September 30 the following year. So the quota year that we are in right now started October 1 of 2024, and it will end September 30 of 2025. On October 1, every single year, 85,000 new H-1Bs become available. So October 1 is when 85,000 new H-1Bs are released and available. That quota of 85,000 is divided into two different buckets. There is a bucket of 20,000 H-1Bs available just to individuals who have a U.S. advanced degree, that is any degree above a bachelor's degree from a United States college or university. If you have a U.S. advanced degree, you are in the 20,000 quota that's called the advanced degree quota. Everybody else is in the 65,000 quota called the regular quota. So if you have let's say you have a master's degree from Canada, you're in the 65,000, the regular quota, because that's not a U.S. advanced degree. If you have a PhD from China, you're in the 65,000 quota. It's not a U.S. advanced. If you have a bachelor's degree from GW, you're in the 65,000 quotas. It's not an advanced degree. But do you care which one of these quotas? Do you care whether it's the 20,000 quota? Do you care whether it's a 65? No, you don't care. You just want to get a quota number, and I'm going to tell you how you can maximize your chances of getting one of those quota numbers in a second. So here's the deal. On October 1 of 2024, 85,000 H-1Bs became available. We are right now about halfway through the quota year, which will end September 30 of 2025. Anybody have any idea how many H-1Bs are still available? None. There are 0 H-1Bs still available. And in fact, all H-1Bs, all 85,000 were taken on October 1, the very first day the quota became available. Well, how did that happen? It happens because you can pre-file to get an H-1B. And it's important for you to understand how this pre-filing process works. So let's take a look at that. So here up on the screen right now, you'll see the shaded area of this graph. The shaded area is the H-1B quota year. So the quota year started on October 1, 2024, and it's going to run until September 30 of 2025. For as long as the H-1Bs remain available, the Immigration Service can issue new H-1Bs. But as I said, all are taken on October 1, and they're taken on October 1 because employers can actually pre-register to try to get one of those quota numbers. Every single year in March, there is a pre-registration period that every employer who wants to sponsor an H-1B must file a registration. This year, the registration period that we are in right now started on March 7, and it will end on March 24. During that registration period, employers that want to sponsor an H-1B have to file a registration application. And the registration application is reasonably simple. The employer has to give some basic information about the employer, company name, tax ID number, that sort of thing. Basic idea about the person that the employer wants to sponsor for H-1B, including information about your country of birth, basic information about your passport, no information about the job itself, no information about your degree other than to say whether you have an advanced degree or not, and the employer will file the registration. The registration must be submitted during the registration period this year between March 7 and March 24. And as long as the registration is submitted during that registration period, you will be placed in the H-1B lottery. And they have an H-1B lottery because every single year there are far more registrations submitted than there are quota numbers available. So the quota is 85,000. Last March, during the registration period, there were over 500,000, over 500,000 registrations submitted for the 85,000 quota. And I expect this year there will be many more than 500,000 registrations submitted for the 85,000 quota. So what happens is at the end of the registration period this year on March 24, the government will assemble all the registrations that were submitted. And they will they'll take all 500,000, all 500,000 or 600,000, whatever. First thing they do is they will segregate out all of the advanced degree registrations, because when you file the registration, you check a little box saying whether you're in the advanced degree lottery. If you check the advanced degree registration box, they'll take your case and put it out as the first step in the lottery process. So let's say out of the 500,000 submitted, let's say 100,000 were advanced degree cases. So they segregate out 100,000. They then count out 20,000 because that's the advanced degree quota, 20,000. They then take the remaining 80,000. They put it back into the bin, mix it all up all over again, and then they count out 65,000. Once they have counted out 20,000 for the advanced degree and 65,000 for the regular quota, that's it. But recognize, if you have a U.S. advanced degree, you get 2 chances in the lottery. First, you get a chance in the 20,000 advanced degree lottery process. Then you get a second chance in the regular lottery process. But once they've counted out 65,000 regular cases and 20,000 advanced degree cases, that's the end of the quota. They notify by April 1 whether your case was selected in this H-1B lottery. If your case was selected, then you move on and submit the full H-1B petition. And in that H-1B petition, you will demonstrate to the government that your degree relates to the duties of the position. So the first step in the registration, you don't submit information about the job or your degree, other than say whether it's an advanced degree. If your case is selected, then you do the full H-1B petition where you demonstrate that your degree program relates to the duties of the job. Immigration Service will, once you are selected in the lottery on April 1, you will have 90 days to submit that H-1B petition. You can work continuing to use your optional practical training while you're waiting for the H-1B petition to be approved. Once that petition is approved, you will change your status to H-1B, but only as of October 1, because October 1 is when the quota is released. So you use your OPT to bridge the time that you're allowed to work until you get selected in the H-1B lottery and your H-1B petition is approved. Well, let's say that you are not selected in the H-1B lottery. Are there options that are available to you? Well, truth of the matter is there are not very many options available if you're not selected in the H-1B lottery. So first category of alternatives to the H-1B, actually not an alternative to the H-1B, there are certain organizations that are exempt from the H-1B quota. These organizations can actually file an H-1B at any time. So if you go to work for a university is exempt from the quota. They can file an H-1B anytime. April doesn't matter to them. The March registration doesn't matter. October 1 doesn't matter. They can file an H-1B at any point. So you go to work for a university, you don't have to be in a faculty position. Universities have very sophisticated business offices. You can go to work for a university. They can file an H-1B for you at any point. Other organizations that are exempt from the H-1B quota, I have listed up here on this board. Note that many people believe that all nonprofits are exempt from the quota. That is not true. To be exempt from the quota, the nonprofit must be either related to a university or it must be a nonprofit research organization engaged primarily in basic or applied research. If you go to work for one of the organizations listed up here on the screen, you may apply for an H-1B at any point. You don't have to worry about the H-1B quota. Well, what happens if you're not selected in the lottery and you're not working for one of these exempt organizations? Are there options available to you? Well, not very many. So I have these listed up here on the screen, some of the alternatives to the H-1B. If you are a citizen of one of the countries listed at the top of the screen, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, and Australia, there are excellent options that may be available to you other than the H-1B. Canada and Mexico, you have what's called a TN, Treaty NAFTA. For citizens of Chile and Singapore, there's the H-1B1 option. For citizens of Australia, you have a thing called the E3. All of these are similar to the H-1B, but they never run out of quotas. Next option that may be available is what's called L1. If you are working for a multinational company, you may qualify for what's called an L1 visa. L1 is for individuals working for a multinational company who first work outside the United States for at least a year. Then you may transfer back into the United States using L1 if you are either a manager or executive, or you're working in a job that requires highly specialized knowledge of the company's products, procedures, clients, whatever. So L1 is an option for individuals working for multinational corporations. Another option that may be available is called the E-Visa. This is for individuals who are from countries that have treaties of trade and commerce with the United States. If you are from a country with a treaty of trade and commerce, you may qualify for an E-Visa if you go to work in the United States for a company owned by citizens of your country. So, for example, Germany is a treaty country. If you are a German citizen and you go to work in the United States for a German-owned company, you may qualify for an E-Visa. Countries that do not have treaties of trade and commerce, China and India are the biggest examples. If you are from China or India, E-Visa is not available to you. But you can actually Google E-Visa treaty countries to see if your country is a treaty country eligible for E-Visa. An E-Visa would even allow you to open your own company and sponsor yourself for an E-Visa. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're from a treaty country, E may be an excellent option. But let's say you're not selected in the lottery, you're not working for an exempt organization, you're not from one of the countries across the top of the screen, you're not working for a multinational, no L1, you're not from a treaty country, no E-Visa. What options may be available? For most students, they either re-enroll in a degree program or they just go home. You can always work for the duration of your optional practical training, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't get selected in the H-1B lottery, there are very few options that are available. And it's at this point in the program that I typically get kind of depressed because the H-1B quota is very limiting. It's limiting for international students. It's limiting for companies in the United States, but the quota is not going anywhere. And I don't foresee that it's going to go away anytime soon. So it's important to understand how the quota works. And as an international student, it is always important for you to plan ahead. So when you're in the last semester of your degree program, plan ahead to get that OPT. While you're using OPT, make sure you talk to the employer, plan ahead to make sure you file the H-1B registration during the March registration period. If you are selected in the H-1B lottery and your H-1B is approved, then you're going to want to start thinking about a permanent resident green card. And with that, I'll turn it over to the folks at GW so we can answer questions.
Thanks, Mark Rhoads. We do have few questions on the chat. I encourage more students to put their questions in the chat box. I'll just be reading them one after the other so that you can go ahead and answer them.
Okay.
So the first question we have here is, if my work start date is more than 90 days after graduation, do you still recommend applying for OPT as early as possible?
Well, you can, when you apply for OPT, you can ask the immigration, you can tell the Immigration Service when you want the card to be effective. You can make the card effective anytime within the 60-day period after graduation. So you make the card effective during that 60-day period, then you will have the additional 90 days of unemployment time. But yes, I do advise applying as early as you can.
Got it. The next question we have is, what if I get my EAD card mailed to me after the start date mentioned?
If your EAD is mailed after the start date, too bad. You can't go to work until you have the card. If you go to work before you have the card, then you are deportable from the United States, and the employer can be fined by the federal government for putting you to work before you have the card. So you cannot work until you have the card.
Got it. So basically, you need to have the physical possession of the EAD card before you can even go ahead and work.
That is correct.
Perfect. So when is the earliest we can apply for the STEM extension of OPT?
I'll leave that to the International Student Office. They are the experts on OPT and STEM.
Okay, so the student would be advised to reach out to ISO for this question. The next question we have is, for purposes of my H-1B application, can I use my undergraduate degree or previous degrees acquired outside the United States to show relevance to the job position?
Yeah, so the H-1B, you can use any degree that you want as long as that degree is related to the duties of the position. So if you have an undergraduate degree in accounting and you ended up getting a master's degree in art history and you graduate and you want to go to work as an accountant, well, you have an accounting degree, your undergraduate degree, so use that one. That's going to qualify you for the H-1B. You can use any degree you want as long as the degree relates to the duties of the position.
Perfect. Another question we have is, if I fail to win the H-1B lottery, are there any other options? What do you think of day one CPT?
Well, the options that would be available are what I had up on the screen a moment ago, and that is unfortunately very limited. You have the countries at the top of the screen. You have an L1, you have the E visa. You could, if you have the STEM extension, recognize you can apply every single year in the H-1B lottery if you have the STEM extension. So you potentially have up to 3 years of eligibility for the H-1B lottery.
And the student did ask about what do you think of day one CPT?
Well, I mean, day one CPT. So what happens is if you're not selected in the lottery and you're running out of your OPT, students will, you see the fourth bullet point down, re-enroll in a full-time course of study. If you re-enroll in a degree program that has a work component that is part of the program, you can qualify for curricular practical training, CPT. There are universities that offer a curricular practical training if you're in an advanced degree program that start the very first day your program starts. That's what's called day one CPT. I've handled many cases where individuals used day one curricular practical training to continue to work. It's an expensive way to stay in the United States because you have to pay tuition in order to do it, but there are many individuals who pursue that option.
Got it. The next question we have is there any difference between the online or paper of I-765 form and the process that's done by the ISO team?
You can submit the application online. I typically like the hard copy with the photos and the checks. I can't tell you the number of times that people have tried to submit electronically and it's bounced for reasons unknown to me, or the filing fees have a problem transmitting from your bank to the Immigration Service. So it's certainly an option, but to me, I prefer the paper option, but I'm an analog kind of a guy.
Perfect. And also just to add to that, Mark, for the student, the process with GWU ISO is a prerequisite before you submit your I-765 form. So it's advised that you complete your ISO step first before you go ahead filing for your I-765, just to get that clarified for the student.
Yep.
The next question we have is, what if my visa expires before my OPT is approved? What should I do?
Well, the visa can always expire. Your visa is just a document that allows you to enter the United States. Once you enter the United States, what governs your stay is your I-20 and your I-94 arrival departure card. Your I-94 is always going to say D/S, duration of status. So as long as you're maintaining your student status, that is either a full-time degree program or the period of optional practical training, your visa can expire. That doesn't impact your ability to remain in the United States. The next time you travel outside the United States, you'll need to get a new visa to re-enter, but as long as you're here, the visa can expire, no problem.
Got it. Another question is, do all countries accept this H-1B lottery?
I'm not, so the H-1B is only for individuals who are applying for a U.S. work visa.
Mark, I think the question would be whether there are any restrictions on applying for any country.
No, so the H-1B lottery process is totally random. So any citizen of any country can have an employer file an H-1B. There are no countries that are barred from pursuing H-1B. And I can tell you that I get lots of students who ask me, is it really a random lottery? I mean, they get all these registrations in. Is it truly random that they just randomly pick up 85,000 cases? Are there any allocated specifically for engineering jobs or specifically for Microsoft or for Tesla or anything like that? And the answer is, in my experience, and again, I've processed countless registrations. It's totally random. I mean, I've had PhDs in computer engineering who were not selected, where a tennis pro at a local club was selected. So it's, in my experience, completely random.
Got it. The next question is, if I get selected for an H-1B before my OPT expires, does it add on to my total duration period or reduces it?
Yeah, so as if you, to go back to the screen with the timeline. So let's say you graduate in May. If you were selected in the H-1B lottery, and you file the H-1B petition and the petition is approved, it will not become effective until October 1, because that's when the quota is released. You can continue to work using your optional practical training. And if your optional practical training expires before October 1, you can continue to work using OPT. It's called cap gap relief, as long as you filed an H-1B petition before your OPT expired. So as long as you file an H-1B, you've been selected in the lottery, you file an H-1B before your OPT expires, your OPT will automatically extend until October 1, when the quota is released.
Got it. The next question, we do have a few more questions, Mark. I hope that's okay to go over.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so the next question we have is, if my F1 visa is to expire, let's say December 2026, and I graduate early, maybe May 2026, does that mean that I still will be eligible to stay in the United States till December 2026?
No, the visa is totally irrelevant to how long you can stay in the United States. What governs your stay is your I-20. And if your I-20 is, your graduation date is in May of 2025, then you will have up to that point plus 60 days to stay in the United States, no longer. I don't care how long your visa is, it's the I-20 that counts.
Got it. The next question is there any quota for country of origin for H-1B?
There is no quota for based on country of origin. It's just the general quota of 85,000 for any country, no matter how many are selected.
Got it. Another question we have, if my program end date is May 9, the latest EAD start date that I can delay to is July 8th. That's the question.
You would have to get a calendar and count 60 days.
Okay. The next question we have is the lottery selection after registration random? I think you did go over that.
Yes,
Okay.
totally random.
Yeah. Okay. We have another question, I think. Yes. If my F1 visa is to expire, let's say, okay, yeah, this has already been answered. If I use OPT in advanced degree, will I be able to use an OPT again after getting a bachelor's degree?
You can get new OPT for every higher degree level that you go to. So if you have a bachelor's degree and you use OPT, you then go and get a master's degree, you get a new 12 months. If you go get a PhD, you get a new 12 months. But if you have a master's degree and you go down and get a bachelor's degree, that's not a higher degree, no new OPT.
Okay. That was the last question we had, Mark. I don't see any more questions from the students.
I see one, but they sent it directly to me by mistake.
Oh yeah, I got that. That's not an issue. I think I did cover that.
Okay, I had one more question. Is there a specific period of time that you have to have been working for an employer before on an H-1B before they can do a green card application for you?
No, there's no waiting period. Once you have an employer could actually sponsor you for a green card even before you start working for them. So yeah, there's no waiting period. You can apply right away.
Okay, thank you.
I do see one more question just that's been sent. Even if after I-20 expires and if you have OPT, can you continue working and stay in the United States without having any issues?
Read that again.
So it says even after I-20 expires and if you have an OPT, can you continue working and stay in the United States without having any issues?
Your I-20 won't expire if you have OPT. It will be authorized for the entire period of your optional practical training.
Yeah, I think that was it.
I think we
So,
have
yeah.
arrived at time as well.
All
Thank
right.
you so much, Mark. This has been so enlightening for all of our students. As usual, it's great to have you here at GW, especially at the business school. And all students here, you have the resources that Mark has on the screen. Mark, do you want to say a few words about how students can contact you?
Yeah, I mean, if you have questions or if you have employers who have questions, just send me an email and I'm happy to answer them. We field many questions from international students every single year.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Meghna, as well. And thank you everybody for being with us. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
afternoon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.